started, I was like, oh my gosh, it's incredible. How could you be able to try that many cases? You'd be like the complete master of the courtroom. The drawback to doing that sometimes in a prosecutor's office is there's very few people to watch you or critique you, and you, at a certain point of seniority, you're more senior than anybody else. And there's nobody to really give you any critique, any more feedback. So you can make certain errors for the next 25 years. You just keep doing the same old thing over and over again, and you can't really improve, you can't challenge yourself. And sometimes there are things you actually simply do wrong in terms of trial work. And some of the private firms actually will be somewhat prejudiced against people who've been in the government for too long. And one of the reasons for that is an unconscious kind of bias, is the notion that they've been doing things the same way for a long time and the quality may not necessarily be that high. But there's no substitute for the amount of actual hands-on experience that you do there. So I was able to spend time in the violent crime section. I prosecuted sex abuse cases, child abuse cases, domestic violence cases, and then I moved into doing public corruption cases. And one of the great things, again, about being in government here was you could go off on what they call details, which were special assignments. You could leave the office, and I did an independent counsel investigation, went to visit all these Indian tribes as part of a corruption case about casinos and licenses. But you kept your regular job and career position as a prosecutor, so when you finished that assignment, you could come back to it. A little bit like the military, getting a special assignment, but it was great because you could do a wide variety of things. I left when, well, my last job was kind of hard to beat. I was counsel to Attorney General Reno, so it was a very fun job. It was kind of like you're at the top of the department looking down. And after that, I didn't really want to go back to trying the cases anymore at that point, because after being there a number of years, you do realize that the resources in the government are scarce as well, and as you're starting to do more complicated cases, you start to more run into the limitations of those resources. You get a little bit frustrated, you want to do a complex case, but you can't get the agents to do it, you can't get the authorizations to do certain kinds of wiretaps, etc. So you find some of those limitations, and I wanted to do more complex litigation and to actually have clients. The difference in the government as a prosecutor is you certainly are representing the people of the United States, and you have victims that you work with, but you're not really in that type of attorney-client relationship with a human being. It's really a privileged relationship with the government representing their interests. So you can only get that when you're in the private sector actually representing people, and I wanted to have that experience. So initially I went to a very small boutique firm in DC. They were all extremely intelligent, really nice. Almost all of them had been Supreme Court clerks. I was like the only guy who only had the lowly federal clerkship. And it was very great money, and I was really, really bored. After about 3 years, I was bored beyond words. And this taught me something, which was, people say this all the time, that you kind of have to follow your passions, follow your interests. And what I found was that if you really aren't challenged enough by the job, you really do need to leave, because you'll start to make mistakes. And I became very worried about that, because even though I was bored, it was still high pressure, it was still high quality work, and I could feel that I just wasn't motivated enough to want to do the best I could anymore. So I knew there was time to leave that. We had a huge arbitration case where we've been working on it for about like almost a year. It was the closest thing to a trial that I'd had since I got into the private sector. I was interviewing witnesses, I was doing depositions, and I was going to do one piece of the arbitration. And the eve before the arbitration was to start, it settled. And I just felt this tremendous wave of kind of like letdown, and that's when I realized how much I actually missed the one-on-one working with people and the chance to actually get up and try cases. And so I left there, and I didn't think a long time ago when I first started working in the government that I was much of an entrepreneur. I thought I'd be very happy working in the government, very happy just being a lawyer, not having to worry about the business end of things or the marketing end of things. But I joined a plaintiff's firm in a sort of fit of entrepreneurial angst. And they were extremely entrepreneurial, so much so that I wasn't that comfortable with it. It was the idea that you find this theory for these massive cases that they try to bring all across the United States as like a warfare plan. But then if there was a problem with the theory, they would just pull the plug on the cases. And there were people who were signed up as clients who then had no chance of ever getting a recovery. And I wasn't all that comfortable with that type of scenario either. So I left that firm, and a couple friends of mine were working with a firm in China. And so for about a year, I was working in China back and forth, mostly training their lawyers in American legal skills, and doing a little bit of international trade work before a classmate and I opened up a small firm in DC to do individual representation. And the work we do now is, in the second incarnation of this law firm, was I do a lot of college student representation because at GW, Georgetown American, there are these separate student discipline systems, and oftentimes college students may have a usually low-level criminal case, maybe drinking or marijuana, which really on the criminal side is not very serious at all. In fact, most of the time the case might be entirely dismissed, or they might just get probation or what they call diversion, meaning you do some community service and there's never a criminal case brought. But the school systems are much more draconian than that, and they insist on kind of like going full steam ahead without regard to what's happening in the criminal system. So actually what I found over the years was a trickle of these cases would always be coming in, and you had to learn to balance a little bit with both protecting the client on the criminal side, but you really had to be very sensitive as to what was happening on the school side, because being suspended or, worst case scenario, being expelled, it is a horrific situation for students. So we've been doing a lot of that, and one of the really fun aspects of that has actually been working on designing how to do the marketing, how to tell people that we're doing this, because it started out as simply my colleagues in large firms are always calling around looking for people to help with these cases. And so I actually thought of the 3 stages. The first was to make sure that my referral network was very good, that all my colleagues knew that I was doing this. And then I thought we should reach out directly to the students, so we've been working on that. We put together a website specifically for the students. And then the last part of that is having the credentials if the parents want to check you out to make sure that you're a good lawyer, not like a fly-by-night kind of person. That's pretty easy to do because I've got a good resume. But it's the second part that's really interesting. It's trying to get the word out to students and to let them know about what we're doing and what our approach is. And initially, everyone says, oh, you should write a blog for your website to help with the internet visibility. So I began to write a blog, and I thought, well, I should adopt some controversial positions in the blog. And so I adopted this position of, with serious crimes, sexual assault, violent crimes, that the schools should just get the heck out of the way. They don't have any business doing those cases. But as I began to think and write about that and began to get more of those cases, I realized that it wasn't a very controversial position. I thought I was right. And they really didn't know what the heck they were doing, and they really should get out of the way. So I began to work more on making that better articulated, putting some research into it, and it was very exciting because the Huffington Post actually invited me to write regularly on these issues now. So I actually just published the first piece about 2 weeks ago now in HuffPost. And it's very fun trying to get everyone to read it, getting comments. Sometimes the comments are kind of hard to read, but I decided we're going to not respond to the comments. I'm just going to absorb them. But that's been part of really learning about the creative and the entrepreneurial side of doing a small business, which has been like a really great surprise for me. I didn't realize how much satisfaction I would get out of that, being able to apply the legal skills as well as doing something creative with building the business. So I would encourage all of you to ask me questions, but I would leave you with the thought that I do think there are many, many paths you can take to law school, many reasons to do it. Not everyone wants to be a litigator, and that's really important to know. I mean, when I was growing up, my folks didn't know much about law. They were college professors. I kind of had the idea that law was all about being in the courtroom trying a case, which for me, that kind of agreed with me. But there are so many pursuits within the profession that have nothing to do with trying a case or litigation. It's about counseling businesses, it's about putting together creative business deals, it's just about counseling people, giving advice. So by no means should you think of it only as litigation, or for that matter, only as business either. It's just a very broad-based type of career that you can have. And also, there is no set prerequisite for it. I think GW now is doing a pre-law, like a major or a minor that you can have for it. And if you can take some courses in the area, that's great. But people have often asked whether or not you need to major in, for example, political science or English literature. Is it okay if you major in a science and then want to go to law school? And the answer really is none of those things matter. I mean, as long as you learn to do some analysis and you learn to think in a clear and coherent way, and you can do a pretty good job of putting pen to paper on that, because although there is writing in law school and the law, it's not all about producing long research papers either. So it's really a choice that you should make based on the true interests that you have in terms of what major you have. I have to say, there's a difference between other graduate students and law students. So actually, in the seminars, I was very unpopular. I found. I remember one time in one of the seminars, I just made a comment, and the professor really liked my comments. I had a great time in the seminars in Georgetown. And one of the other grad students said with a lot of hostility, he said, all he ever does is wait for other people to make a point, then he just sits back and criticizes it. I was like, what's wrong with that? So that was kind of a different approach to it.